This is Antoinette James, one voice belonging to We the People. As New Zealand has unceremoniously been brought up to speed through the Christchurch attacks, it's now a country in free speech lockdown. The worrying part is most of the citizens have gladly complied. This is probably a result of years of programming in the school classroom where critical thinking has been all but outlawed, and the Prussian model of socialised schooling has raised a generation or two of non-thinking New Zealanders. The natural geographic isolation of New Zealand, combined with mainstream media propaganda, has effectively made New Zealand a little cotton wool box, where people really haven't got the truth of what's happening out there in the wider world. So we've got a Plato's Cave situation where many New Zealanders are now Plato's Cave dwellers. This has made New Zealand an ideal place for such an attack. The globalists are actually about 10 years behind their plans for one world governance of a new world order, and it seems that they're getting rather desperate these days. Zygmunt Brzezinski, who died in 2017, said at a Bilderberger meeting and also at a CFR meeting in 2010, quote, "The biggest obstacle to establishing the one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses," unquote. Yet it seems to me that New Zealanders are still pretty much asleep. New Zealanders are almost acting like NPCs, those non-player characters that we see on video games, who spill the globalist narrative without logic or their brains engaged due to this cotton wooling of New Zealand. There's a mystery behind the gun that was used in the Christchurch attacks. There are two main players behind the gun used in Christchurch. Firstly, we have the gunman. And there are questions we're not allowed to ask. There are questions that we're not allowed the answers to. Was he mind-controlled? Was he a Manchurian candidate? The US Senate investigated the Manchurian Candidate scandal and the MK Ultra and the use of ordinary men and women who went into hospital for normal things and without their knowledge or consent were experimented on through hypnosis and drugs and mind control to see if they could bring them into unwitting assassins. Assassinations and assassins were actually outlawed in the US in the 1970s because of the Manchurian Candidate. There are other questions. Who funded the gunman? He said that he made his thousands of dollars through BitConnect, which is a cryptocurrency, during the time when most people lost sorely. Why did he visit Turkey twice for lengthy stays? And while he was there was a terrorist attack mounted on the German embassy. Question we need to ask and have answered is, was the attacker a vulnerable man? Was he used and then discarded in some kind of black operation? Why did he give the Illuminati Freemasonry hand sign? Was he signaling to his handlers? Why isn't the New Zealand media telling the public the truth? Why is it that the gunman's grandmother said he changed completely after his trip to Pakistan, Israel, North Korea, Hungary, Croatia? Why is it that his manifesto was named Replacement? He visited France, and that is a movement that is getting bigger there. What happened to him? This is his Facebook post from Pakistan. Now, this was just last year, 2018. Quote, "Hello, everyone. My name is... and I am visiting Pakistan for the first time. Pakistan is an incredible place filled with the most earnest, kind-hearted, hospitable people in the world. And the beauty of Hunza and Nagar Valley in autumn cannot be beat. Unfortunately, many tourists are choosing other countries due to the stress and difficulty and steep requirements of obtaining a Pakistani visa. Hopefully, in the near future, the Pakistani government and Mr. Imran Khan will make the necessary changes to the visa program so to encourage tourism and make it viable once more for the world to come and experience the beauty of Pakistan." So last year, he had no issues with the Muslim religion. We may never know the answers to these questions because we seem to have in New Zealand a Stasi government who now send police out in the wee small hours of the morning, 2 a.m., and rout out of bed law-abiding New Zealand citizens with trumped-up charges to remove their firearms. This is exactly how Stalin started out, with his long, endless list of people that had to be removed. I remember in the late 1960s, 1970s, New Zealand had a lot of Pacific Island overstayers. They were routed out of bed very early by the police, and there was a human outcry. Such were the violations to their human rights. It seems now in New Zealand that the NPCs, the Plato's cave dwellers, don't mind if it's about guns or about people that are right-wing in their views. It seems also now in 2019 in New Zealand, it's almost a Nazi mindset. They can justify what they do in this post-truth world, this subjective truth. I'd like to read an excerpt from a speech. It can be found on page 409 in my book, We Are Revolting, The Inconvenient Truth. When the Nazis came for the communists, I remained silent. I was not a communist. When they locked up the Social Democrats, I remained silent. I was not a Social Democrat. When they came for the trade unionists, I did not speak out. I was not a trade unionist. When they came for the Jews, I remained silent. I wasn't a Jew. When they came for me, there was no one left to speak out. This was Friedrich Niemöller. He was a Protestant pastor during the Nazi regime. So this brings me onto the other gunman, or should I say anti-gun woman. We are allowed to know her name, Jacinda Ardern. Unlike the gunman, her name is allowed to be liberally bandied about in New Zealand and abroad. Her anti-gun role in this dialectic swing was to make way for her globalist handlers. The gunman is the thesis, the anti-gun woman is the antithesis, and the New World Order Stasi laws are the synthesis. And like all organised planned dialectic manoeuvres, the New Zealand public have gladly surrendered their freedoms to the elite. They believe they have the right to rule the whole world, and we, the people of New Zealand, are obliged to be ruled. You'll learn more about those who believe it is their right to rule and believe that it is our right to be ruled in my book, We Are Revolting. In We Are Revolting, I spend some time explaining the history of that mindset, where it comes from, how it was propagated, and why it still exists today. So there are questions we are not allowed to ask about the anti-gun woman. There are questions that we are not allowed to have answers to. Is she mind-controlled? Is she a common purpose graduate? I'll talk more about common purpose later, but it's very significant for the West. And even in New Zealand, we need to hear that name, understand it, and be warned. What do we know? Where the gunman had no feeling, the anti-gun woman is oozing with feeling. The anti-gun woman rose up the political ranks swiftly, groomed in the Tony Blair UK cabinet among the Fabians. We Are Revolting. I talk a lot about the Fabians, who they are, what their goals are, and where they can be found today. The anti-gun woman won't allow the gunman a voice, but she claims to speak for the whole nation of New Zealand by force, threatening up to a 14-year jail sentence for any dissenters. This altruistic anti-gun woman and her political toy boy, Winston Peters, seems to have no national feelings. Professor Ed Dutton, an English anthropologist teaching in Finland, holding a degree in theology and a PhD in religious studies, in an interview with Vinny Eastward, called Jacinda Ardern, quote, a deeply unstable woman, unquote. He stated for a leader of a country to break down in public, wear a headscarf and influence others, including the police, in a controversial display shows her extreme opinions must be followed. Dutton said her display of agreeism, empathy, was not appropriate for a leader. She was susceptible to neuroticism and worry. Dutton commented that for a Mormon to be brought up achieving a degree of glory, destined for the celestial heaven, for that person to give up everything they've been brought up with and to leave it with the threat of going into outer darkness was an extreme swing, inducing instability in any individual. This complete change of identity in her 20s, 30s was a sign of instability. Dutton suggests Ardern was not up for the leadership job. Ardern openly spoke out when she suffered from anxiety while she was Deputy Minister of the Labour Party, making people question whether she is just a puppet Is she New Zealand's Alexandra Cortez? Who is really running the country of New Zealand? Ardern had declared she was, quote, at the precipice, unquote. Such were her problems and anxiety. Dutton suggests her struggle with infertility, her lengthy intervention to become pregnant, is associated with anxiety. Science suggests when you do have mental instability, there are physical issues that go with it, and infertility is one of those signs. This anti-gun woman, Ardern, cannot say the gunman's name. Dutton suggests this is a sign of obsessive-compulsive disorder. He also suggests that she looks too gaunt for a woman who has recently had a baby, and he suggests it's a sign of anxiety. Dutton said, quote, under normal conditions, of course, and where people are more questioning and where people are prepared to talk about mental illness and say, well, perhaps mental illness is not a particularly good idea in people in power, good in artists maybe, but not in power. Under normal conditions where you can talk about that, this would never have happened. But under conditions where you can't talk about that, which has been caused by these ideologies like political correctness, which themselves could be ultimately seen as expressions of the spiteful mutation that manifests. So should you be Prime Minister? You can't say, look, you have just had a baby. Do you think this is a good idea? You can't. And you end up with this hysterical woman in charge of the country who indulges her own insanity, her own hysteria in a whole nation. This is very dangerous. She should be running a cake stall, not a country. She is a dangerous woman to be in this position. End of quote. I have some questions, I have to say. I'm not as aggressive as Dutton in my views, but I do feel she should have given full disclosure on her pregnancy before the elections. I know she was told to keep it quiet by her handlers because it would reflect in less people voting for her, but less people voted for her anyway. It was one man, Winston Peters, that overturned the democratic process of the people. One man, not the citizens, that put her into power. So how could this anti-gun woman be dangerous? Dutton suggests she has, by law, with penalty of jail time, made it illegal to question the Fed narrative. She has shut down free speech and critical thinking that mature, educated adults naturally indulge in. Nazi Germany started out this way. While the non-player characters cheered Hitler on blindly, freedoms were slowly eroded. One of the first things Hitler did when he got into power was regulate guns, control guns, have lists of people who own guns, refused to let Jews have guns, and even some of his own members of his party. On page 33, I have a quote, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who died in 2008. He was a Russian novelist, historian, and a short story writer, and he's the author of One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. He also wrote Gulag Archipelago, and he said, we should have resisted the KGB at the front door. If the KGB thought they might not go home that night, the Russian people might have had a different fate. It is time for New Zealanders to stand up and resist this lack of freedoms while it's at the front door. New Zealanders need to be asking, why would a government, a democratically elected government, make laws to suppress the truth, shut down inquiry? Why is the media the government's lapdog instead of the public's guard dog? The answer? Could it be that this anti-gun woman is the window dressing mannequin? In her address to the nation after the Christchurch attack, she wore a red shirt under her jacket. And yes, I realise red is a Labour colour, but after these types of attacks and incidences around NATO countries, of which New Zealand joined in 2016, news presenters often wear red clothes, wear dresses to signal to the elites that this operation is under control. Nothing to see here. All is good. New Zealanders need to be aware that the elites are marching through the institutions, as China coined it. The Fabians in Britain, who are behind Common Purpose, a supposed registered charity, had near crippled the country, marching through the institutions, destroying it from within. The National Health Service, the NHS, is probably the most burdened. Julia Middleton and her team use NLP brainwashing techniques, that's neuro-linguistic programming. Common Purpose is targeting New Zealand youth. In their website, Commonwealth Youth New Zealand, it entices young people to be part of the future leadership of the country. They're looking for the next generation of global leaders to empower. Don't be flattered if you're chosen. I suggest you run for the hills. Common Purpose is alive and well in New Zealand. A quick lesson on their brainwashing techniques is best learned by watching Theo Chalmers' On the Edge interview with Brian Gerrish in 2012. The link's below. That was some 8 years ago. We need to really be aware that it is well trenched. LinkedIn in New Zealand advertise Common Purpose positions. I looked at some of those yesterday. There were 11 positions, Common Purpose positions. These are people that have been through the training, through the brainwashing that goes on through the Common Purpose training. Common Purpose headquarters is in London. They also have branches in Germany, Hong Kong, Hungary, India, Ireland, Singapore, South Africa, Turkey, US, no doubt in Australia and in New Zealand. One of the Common Purpose jobs here in New Zealand is Senior Financial Advisor for the New Zealand Defence Force. Another job is Key Accounts Nutritionist Specialist for Waikato, Ultrahonga, South Waikato, Northern Regional Operations Manager in the RWR Health Auckland, Northern Regional Operations Manager in Hospo World Resourcing Australia, based in Auckland, Developer Practice Lead, Ministry of Primary Industries in Wellington. All these positions are needing to be filled by someone that is a graduate from the Common Purpose course. Not just anyone can be a Common Purpose graduate. You have to be chosen. They're looking for a particular mindset that they can manipulate. One of their courses was called Matrix, and it was a 40-hour intensive course and then had several other follow-up courses. It cost over £3,000 when it ran in the UK, although taxpayer money does pay for a lot of course fees. People that are chosen, selected to go into Common Purpose courses tend to be people of influence, people that aren't too structured in their thinking one way or another, and they learn how to control cities or small countries like New Zealand. The seniors select who is going to do the courses. They find the right person. This includes criminals, ministers of religion. They target school teachers. They even run courses for senior students in schools. There's been a spate of suicides a few years ago in South Wales where Common Purpose courses were run. I'm not saying that that's because of suicides, but it's a very interesting link. All this goes on outside the public eye. You're not allowed to know much. It's Chatham House rules. You're allowed to say any of the information that you gain in the meetings, but you're not allowed to say who were in those meetings or who gave you that information. Wherever Common Purpose arrives, things tend to break down in a town or a country. There's lots of cover-ups. No one's answerable. One targeted area is the police force, particularly in the UK. Several people have said when their spouse have gone through these Common Purpose courses, they're a completely different person. They don't know who they are, suggesting that there is brainwashing going on. Common Purpose is closely associated with Demos in the UK. This is a Marxist think tank closely working with the Tony Blair cabinet. The founder of Common Purpose is Julia Middleton. Again, came out of nowhere, funded by Deutsche Bank in Germany. In the UK, a lot of public money has been given to her to use with no accountability, and I would suggest the same is happening in New Zealand. Their end goal, their aim, is to create future leaders without definition. So we don't really know what that future leader is. It doesn't mean the future leader that we would think in our minds. They're looking for a new society, a post-democratic era. It's called a charity, but it's definitely political. They're reframing people to follow their set of values. They're breaking down boundaries. dumbing down and breaking institutions and values. Common purpose in New Zealand, we can be sure that New Zealand has actually been controlled from outside. Strong Freemasonry links. So because demos has a big hand in common purpose, it's worth just looking at who they are. Well, they were founded in 1993 by former Marxist Today editor Mark Jacques. He is son of parents who both belong to the Communist Party of Great Britain. Demos is registered as an educational charity. In the 1997 UK general election, Demos was very closely linked to Tony Blair and the Labour Party. The co-founder, Jeff Mulgan, held the post of Director of Policy at 10 Downing Street under Tony Blair, and he was chief advisor also to Gordon Brown. He was also a board member of Big Society Capital. If you read my book, We Are Revolting, I go into detail about symbols the elite use. It's part of their culture, and we need to understand there's a whole structure of the way the elites perform their life and go about their business. And just like any culture has symbols, we know we're in an Indian culture, we know we're in a Western culture, we know we're in an Asian culture, mainly by the symbols we see around us and architecture. I speak on this in great detail in my book, We Are Revolting, and the elites have that same culture, and we need to understand that culture, then we can see their hand at work, and demos is their hand at work. To finish, I'd like to read a quote from Woodrow Wilson. It's an excerpt from a speech at the New York Club in 1912. He says, "Liberty has never come from the government. Liberty has always come from the subjects of the government. The history of liberty is a history of resistance. The history of liberty is a history of limitation of governmental power, not the increase of it." End of quote. And he should know, if one man is responsible for the infiltration, for the hijacking of America and the bringing down of the American people, he's the man. Don't be a Plato's cave dweller. Shake off your chains and get out. Be responsible. Be an adult. Stop being the result of a dumbed-down education. I'd like to quote Marcuse. He was from the Frankfurt School. He says this in 1971. "Let me tell you this, that I regard your notion of the long march through the institutions as the only effective way." What way is he talking about? He's talking about the way to communism.